Hi, I'm Rick Crow, and this is Short Track Stories. All right, here we go. Another episode of Short Track Stories, and I'm sure you guys can recognize the face, Craig Rayburn, a nemesis that really wasn't a nemesis, but we spent a lot of time pushing each other around and banging some doors. How are you, Craig?
I'm good. How are you, Rick?
I'm doing outstanding.
Thanks for having me.
I'm going to start this with a little story about. I remember when I moved to Simi, we were at Chi-Chi's, and little Garrett had, I guess, been watching videos of us racing, and you and I were talking by a table or something. We walked out to the car, and little Garrett goes, "Dad, who's that?" I said, "That was Rayburn." He goes, "You talk to that guy?"
Right?
You know, so
that was the enemy.
And then it was a couple of years later where we saw each other at a back to school night, and your daughter, one of them or both of them, went to school with Joey Crowe.
Yeah, it was Phoenix Ranch, right?
Phoenix Ranch, and then I think that they went together at Valley View also.
Yeah.
So they must be close in age, or
yeah. How old's your youngest? Because mine's 23.
Joey's, he's probably around there. I think he was
I think that's right.
11, 17, 99. He was born in 99. So
yeah, that's when my youngest, Pamela, was born 99. So same age.
What if they would have been dating or something and we didn't know, and they just walked in, right?
You know, you look back and all these people that you used to not really, I can name names that, we weren't best of friends, like Dinger and Cromsight, you and Rip and all these guys. And I mean, it's not that we really didn't like each other. It's just that, you were a competitor. So you can't like your competitor and be successful. At least that's kind of the way I looked at it back then. If you ride around the back, everybody's your friend, right? Oh yeah, he's a nice guy. So if you're always battling, sometimes you ruffle feathers. I'm sure I've ruffled yours before, right?
Yeah, I was thinking about that the other night, and I really don't, honest to goodness, think of a time when you ruffled my feathers. I mean, I thought you were clean, and I think a lot of it too was I watched you race at Saugus before I raced, and you must have been about 13 or something, when you first started. But I remember in '89, I mean, we were probably in every single dash together, every single year, all that. And I mean, Becker's ruffled my feathers. Yeah. I don't remember. Dinger never did. Rip, he was on and off. He didn't race every week. Really, I think the only one that I really kind of despised was Becker's. that whole year, but I don't know.
Have you had him on this?
I have not.
Oh, okay.
I saw him down at the Clash at the Coliseum last year. Him and his wife.
We were there.
Good race. Are you going to go again?
Yeah, unless it's raining or something. I mean, if it's raining, I'm not going. But everybody's like, "Oh, they go so slow." But I'm like, "Yeah, but there's so much action." You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Short little races and everything. I thought it was great.
Yeah, so did I. I thought it was good. So I was looking, because I didn't know a lot about you. I mean, I remember watching you race before I raced, and and then we raced together, and then we raced super lates together, or sportsmen's, whatever you want to call it. But as close as I can tell at Saugus, your first year at Saugus was like '83. Is that?
Yeah.
Street
so long story short, my dad used to race at Knoxville in the dirt.
Tennessee?
Yeah. No, Iowa.
Oh, okay.
And my family's all from Iowa, except for me. I'm from Van Nuys.
So my family's from Iowa as well.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
They're from Manchester, which is near Cedar Rapids. And so my mom and dad, born and raised from Iowa, and fast forward, they moved out here. I wasn't born yet. And so my dad he didn't really drive. He worked on the car. They had a dirt car. It was a Ford even way back then. They had a 312 with a supercharger on it that they used to race in a circle track. I think my dad said he went out and wheel packed once. He goes, it was a friggin' handful. I mean, it probably made all of 350 horsepower, but no flywheel or anything like that. They were push start cars, so they were probably pretty quick, no weight roll or anything. So then in the 60s, he used to take us, and my cousin Kenny used to come out, and we'd go to Saugus Speedway. And I mean, it looked just like it looks in that picture behind you. And I just remember you'd roll up to it and you'd hear the tires squealing from all the street stocks. I'm like, I want to do that sometime. So my dad had a shop here in Simi Valley, and it's kind of a natural if you have an automotive shop, you get a race car. So in 1980, we went up the street to a neighbor's house, and there's this Thunderbird sitting there. And I'm like, hi, that thing seems kind of big, but that's what we chose to make our first race car out of. And my dad was a Ford guy, so we had to do a Ford. It's like, well, it's his money, whatever. And we purposely chose a 68 T-Bird because that was the first year that you could get a 429 from the factory. And so we put that together with a 4-speed. Originally was an automatic, and it already had a 9-inch in it. So I mean, a lot of the stuff was already there. It had a 3-link in the back. The biggest problem was it was heavy. And the first guy that drove it, I wasn't old enough because he had to be 18, was a guy that worked for my dad, and he wrecked it pretty much every week in like 81. And then towards the end of 81, a guy named Dave Harrison, that may ring a bell for some people. He was like a gypsy. He'd race whatever car was available. And my dad went out to the racetrack with no driver with this car. And I go, who's going to drive it? He goes, I don't know. I'll find someone to drive it. I'm like, all right. So he walked up to Dave Harrison and said, hey, you want to try this thing? And Dave Harrison drove it the rest of 81. And then in 82, he was a contemporary of Kenny Bozé. And I still talk to Kenny Bozé about once a week, even now. He lives in Idaho now.
Oh, wow.
And Kenny Bozé and Dave Harrison were the guys in 82 to win the championship. And I think Bozé won, 13 or 14 figure eights. I mean, he was unstoppable in that Impala. And the big cars were just better in the figure eight. And Bozé's Impala didn't do so well in the oval, where our T-Bird did better in the oval. So I think at the end of the season, we were leading the points, and they decided that they were going to tear our engine down because how could this Ford beat all these Chevrolets? Well, we did have 100 cubic inches on all the Chevrolets,
right?
But we also probably gave up realistically 300 or 400 pounds, and we had little tires, this wide, 7 inches wide.
Yeah.
So at the end of the season, Monty and the tech team decided that they were going to check our camshaft, and it was deemed illegal. So the funny thing was, my mom and dad were escorted out of the racetrack like they were criminals. I'm like, wow.
For that?
Yeah. And then the last race of the season, they were banned and weren't allowed in the pits. I remember they went into the pits and they were asked to leave.
Because they got caught cheating?
Yeah. Yeah. You'd think that they shot somebody the way they were treated. I'm like,
why were the big cars, why were those big cars better in the 8? You think they were better, or you just couldn't pass them?
Yeah, you couldn't pass them. You couldn't push them around. Bozé had a big block Chevy. We had a big Ford. And, everybody had Chevelles, and they were little 327s. But what was kind of neat is you could run a 4-barrel. I mean, a giant 4-barrel, and we had one. I mean, I'm sure we weren't outmotored by many people, but we were probably outhandled by a lot because of the weight. So after that event, and after they were DQ'd, Dave Harrison, I think, moved back east. He was kind of done with the whole Saugus thing. And he was no angel. I mean, he used to wear T-shirts that maybe you shouldn't wear at a racetrack. I remember one vividly. And so in 1983, my dad goes, hey, you want to drive this thing? I'm like, all right. And I was 18 because I was born in 63. So I was old enough. And so I drove it. And it's way
your first year.
I mean, it's way harder than you think. You get out there and you're like, holy crap, this is not what I thought.
Yeah, I was lucky to have, I had, I did a couple of enduros at Ascot, and I raced some at Santa Maria and some at Ventura and then Indian Dunes before I ever clipped off a lap at Saugus. So I had a little bit of seat time. But Saugus was still, way harder than all those. And I mean, that year in 83, that was no slouch year. Sedgwick was was in that car in 83, and guys like Chalgren, I think Rodney was there. I mean, that was a pretty stout bunch
You
of
know, it
guys.
was, to me, when we first started doing it in 81, we were happy if we got in the A main. I mean, there'd historically be 50 some cars. And I remember one thing we lobbied for was if you ran the B main, that you, like the top 2 or the top 4, got to transfer to the A. You know, it's like, don't pay the guys that win the B main, but give them money to start the A, and then they make money in the A. It's not about money. It's about give them an incentive to try and, you know, get to the front and be in the main event.
Right.
It's so different now. You know, you're happy if you have a full field at pretty much any racetrack. But back then, I mean, I'm sure there was 60 cars that raced at least once in multiple years, even when you and I were racing together in the late 80s, early 90s, right? I mean, there was always 50 or 60 cars out there.
Yeah. I know Cromsite said that his first year there was 104 registered street stocks. His number was 104. And
Yeah,
so
that's crazy.
yeah, and I remember like in 80, I think 88, I raced hobby stocks, and I remember the Fall Spectacular. We were pit all the way out by where the Metrolink station is now. I mean, there was, you know, ABC mains full, and yeah, there used to be a lot of cars. Now
Yeah.
they're all somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, you know, the all the Chevelles that we cut up, I shake my head because I work for an insurance company and I see what we pay out on these cars and their total losses. You know, we're paying 40, 50, 60, $70,000 for these Chevelles that I can remember buying nice ones for $100 with no engine or trans and making them race cars and cutting them up. It didn't even bother me. It's like, whatever. It's just junk, you know?
SS hoods,
Yeah,
you know,
SS hoods, you know,
whatever.
real SS cars. You're like, whatever. Who cares?
So 83 was the first time you clicked off some street stock laps in that car, and it looks like you didn't even get your first main event win until the next year. You won a figure 8 race.
No, actually, I won a main event in 83.
Did you?
I have the trophy. Yeah, I have the trophy in my trophy case. You saw that trophy case, I think. You were over
Yeah,
my
yeah.
house one day.
Still have the trophy. I throw mine.
Yeah,
away.
I saved that one because that's my first. So if you think about it, I've been in this game, what, 39 years? I didn't race last year, though, so I can't really take credit for last year.
Yeah, you had a lot of laps at Saugus. I mean, you're 5th on the all-time win list with 41. I mean, that's more than Press. A couple more than Cromsite. He started about the same time as you, but he was hit and miss also. I know Rodney's up there. It's weird, the guys that are up there, some of the guys that are up there, they clicked off a lot of race wins in like jalopy, and you know, I mean, Brian raced jalopies and he raced hobby stock and street stock and pro stock,
Right.
and
Right.
but some of those guys got all their wins in sportsmen's and modifieds too. You know, I think Phipps started in limited late models or limited stock or whatever. He never clicked off some wins in street stocks, I don't think. Do you know?
No, I don't think he started. I think you're right. I think he had a convertible. I think it was a Chevelle, like a 64 or 5. No, it was a 66, I think, convertible. Same color paint. I think number 8, right? 08, same number all those years. Yeah, he's from Simi Valley too. He lives about 3 miles from where I am, something like that.
It was
Maybe.
with all the Simi Valley guys. I know in '89, it seemed like every other driver was, you know, it's Dale White and Nikolai and you, and I mean everybody from Simi Valley. I think there was more people racing from Simi than Santa Clarita.
I think you're probably right. You know that stuff. You know what's funny is being one of the only Ford guys out there originally, we kind of hooked up a little bit with Bill McKnight. That may ring a name.
Yeah, he was.
And I remember as a kid, before the freeway was open, going down Devonshire, because when you left Simi to get to, let's say, Los Angeles, you went down Devonshire and right by Cal State Northridge, and that's where McKnight used to live.
Mm.
I think at Lindley and Devonshire. I may be wrong on that. But you always saw number 97 there. And so, you know, my dad and I just one day walked in there and we said we were going to run a Ford. So he gave us some Holman and Moody stuff for our T-Bird and for old Ford people. Holman and Moody was the Hendrick of their day.
Yeah, I remember that name.
Yeah, that was a factory Ford race team. And so they did a lot of race stuff. Like we had upper control arms that didn't have rubber bushings. They had solid bushings in them from Holman and Moody that were just a bolt-on replacement for our car. So that was kind of cool to have that connection. And then he gave us some tips because he used to run a Galaxy at the time.
Yeah, I was going to say he didn't have a Thunderbird. I was trying to figure out what that was. That was a Galaxy.
Like about a 65 Galaxy, big car. He did pretty good. I remember he used to have leaf springs behind his quarter panels running parallel with the ground, like right where the rear wheels were, so that if somebody bounced into him, the leaf spring would bounce them off.
Oh, that's pretty smart.
Right? I mean, it's heavy, but it's like, wow, that's kind of cool.
Well, back then those guys were into weight. Like I remember I drove Kenny Wilson's car for the guy from See Me Radiator, Jerry Frith.
Yeah.
And that car had lead melted all the way up over inside the frame rail, the whole way from the rear tire all the way up to the front tire on the left side frame rail. I was like, what the hell?
Remember, they wouldn't let you put lead in these cars back in the day at Saugus. And that's where I think Cromsite's like, well, then no lead, I can go light. Because with that Nova, it was unstoppable, right?
I remember at 89, we were light. That my pink car was super light, not very durable. I remember we tore the whole body off it on opening night, and then I think we replaced 3 bodies that year, but we didn't have. I mean, that car only weighed, I think it was 2589 or something. And I know you guys were all 3,300 pound cars, and I remember getting pushed around in the 8 a lot. Like if somebody hit me in the quarter, I really felt it, So
another thing we thought about in the figure 8, because most of the cars turned left pretty well, right? But none of them turned right very well.
Yeah.
So if you could make your right turn better than everybody else's and hold your own on the left turn, that's where you could really pass people. And that's what I don't think a lot of people realize. Everybody's car turns left okay, but the right turn is the one that's the challenge. You used to change your car for Ole at 8, right?
Yeah, and the other thing people didn't realize is that you're way more comfortable in the left. And so if the left is messed up and you're loose or you're pushing, you're used to that. But if it wasn't good on the backwards corner, that just wasn't your forte.
Right. Right.
But yeah, we would swap. I mean, we
Springs
got to the
stuff.
point. Yeah. Crom cited towards when he was racing that Nova and he had the Monte Carlo, and we were doing sway bar bushings, both the front shims, but you had to have 5 or 6 guys to pull that off, right?
We also found out, at least because our car was a rear steer, that Thunderbird, that it liked a lot of toe out on the figure 8. And working in an alignment shop, I could just figure out how many turns of the sleeve I needed to get what I wanted. So I didn't even need to measure it. I just needed to make sure I turned it the right way. And so we'd put a turn of toe out in it, and it was like 3/8 of an inch. But rear steer car is a different beast, and it really liked it. I never told anybody that, but nobody had a rear steer car anyway. A couple Novas were early Novas, I think. Who ran early Novas?
Marluski had one.
Yeah, Marluski. And I don't think the early Novas were nearly as good as the late Novas that steered from the front, from what I saw.
No, my first hobby stock was a rear steer Nova. They were good in the 8 because they never got out from underneath you. It always just felt like you could just barely whap the throttle and they would just settle right back down. But we would run in 89s. We ran a 1/2 inch of toe out.
Did you?
Yeah.
In the 8 or the oval?
In the oval.
Yeah.
And that's obviously, you realize when you get your sportsman car that's a Band-Aid, right? Either your 1/2 inch toe out and this and that. I mean, but we didn't know what bump steer was or any of that kind of stuff,
Yeah. See, we learned working at my father's shop, to mix and match spindles and stuff. So, I mean, one thing we wanted to have is the same bolt pattern as everybody out there. We wanted 5-on-5, which is pretty much the standard in short track racing. So we started doing a little research and found out certain year Fords came with 5-on-5. So we'd put those spindles on and those rotors and then get those axles for the back. And there was different spindles. Like a lot of the later Fords ran a ton of caster, even with the rear steer, like 5 degrees. It's like I'm dating myself, but the Starsky and Hutch Torinos, those cars, pretty much the same car as our T-Bird, except those Torinos were 4 links in the back, like a Chevelle. See, our T-Bird was a 3 link. It had a panhard bar, which was, most cars didn't have those back then.
Yeah, I don't remember any cars that did.
No. So, I mean,
maybe a Rambler.
It was a crutch with a big motor and a big heavy car, but the chassis is very similar to a Banjo Matthews chassis, which was the standard in the late 70s, mid 70s in Cup. Because they used to be rear steer cars, and then they said, oh, front steer is better. So that's how we kind of inherited some of that Holman and Moody stuff that we got over the years. Like, I think they made adjustable strut rods for those cars. And so you could adjust the caster that way. But I mean, it's technically kind of legal. I mean, it was Ford stuff, right?
Yeah. It's just, when did you start hanging out at junkyards? Like, as part of work, did you ever do that, or were you just looked at stuff when you drove?
You know what's funny is, before my father started a front end shop out here, he was trying to buy Fat Auto Wrecking out here in Simi Valley. And I think there was something weird with the lease or something, and it wasn't a long-term lease, because we almost became junkyard dogs here in Simi, but we ended up with a front end shop. But then, remember Pick Apart when that started, and you know, Tony Martinez was a big player with that. I used to go there all the time and look around, and I'm sure you did too, right?
We went there with scales,
right?
Cromside and I literally went there at the bathroom scale, and we're pulling bumpers, and that's when I think it was 89 when we started running like 2 different spindles, 2 different calipers across the front, that kind of stuff. And it was all because we could just go hang out at Pick Your Part all day and look at stuff.
Yeah, and you get it for like almost nothing, right? Yeah. And I mean, you go to Pick Apart now and it's all front wheel drive stuff. But back when we were doing it, Howard, it was, you know, Camaros. There's still a lot of Camaros in there, a lot of Chevelles, believe it or not, and then mid-sized Chevys and whatnot. So
you're pulling stuff off and hiding it in Ford vans, in the back of vans, or you know, there was, when Tony started sponsoring us, then it was just, you just tell Tony what you need. And
right,
that's when we realized that the Ford Fairmonts were the lightest bumper ever produced. We pull those off and you got them and you're like, these are freaking light. So we started running those on everything. But
so I used to run a Chevy van front bumper on that Thunderbird. And we didn't really run it because it was light, but we used to get cast-offs from the body shop because, you know, the bumper had minor damage and somebody paid for a new one. So they threw the old one away. And I'm like, well, this is perfect for a race car. And then my dad had a press. And so every week when I'd bend the hell out of the bumper, I used to put it on the press, straighten it, put it back on. So the problem that I saw is working on race cars doesn't pay very well all day. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because you ended up wanting to work on your race car and not working on customers' cars, and then you didn't make any money. So, and then working on Dale White's car and all those other guys' cars that we worked on over the years, that didn't pay very well. But
no, we saw some guys go out of business, you know.
Yeah.
In our times, a couple bought out. I'm not going to name any names, but a couple guys that had some body shops in the valley, you know, lost their businesses over racing. And you used to see, you know, their kids would show up with, you know, in like just raggedy clothes, but they'd have a super nice race car.
Right.
You know, no. Where did Nat come in?
So, true story. Natalie used to work at Simi Valley Auto Body, and that was about 700 block of Easy Street. My dad's
Wesky's place.
Yeah, Hans Wesky. And we used to do a lot of work for them. And so Hans would call with his little German accent, need a little wheel alignment. And so Natalie would drive the car down, or I'd go get the car from Hans and bring it to my dad's shop. And then I'd walk down or drive the car down, and sometimes she'd give me a ride back. And she was always going out with the same guy all the time. And I'd always ask her, "You still going out with what's his face?" And she goes, "Yeah." All right. So then
it wasn't like Dinger or Dale White or
no, it was no racer.
Oh, okay, good.
It was a guy from Simi. And one time I asked her, he said, "You still going out with that guy?" And she goes, "No." I'm like, "Oh." So we went out on a date on St. Patrick's Day and had green beer. It's the first time I ever drank on the day, like during work.
Yeah.
We went to lunch. We didn't get hammered. We had a couple of beers and that was it. But the problem was I was already going out with a girl at the time, so that wasn't good. So then we got married in 91, and we've been married ever since. So that's what, 30, going on 32 years now.
You're kind of a creature of habit,
right?
you know. That's all right. She's a good catch. She likes racing.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, she already worked for Hans. She knew the racing deal.
Right.
Anybody that can work for Hans at a body shop can probably work for just about anybody.
Right. That's funny. Hans was a good guy. I remember hanging out with him at Riverside. I think it was 92. I went to Riverside and he was racing there, and he was a cool dude. So you guys stuck with that Ford pretty much the whole time. You know, you were running for your dad, I guess, in street stocks. And then you wised up, and I think when I met you, you had just started driving that Gus's Tool. Was that Jackie Sanders' car?
And so Jack goes, "Hey, you want to drive this car?" And we had stopped driving our Thunderbird because we were going to get a sportsman car. So I'm like, okay. So I asked Jack, if I win, what do I get? Because I had a tore up fire suit with a hole in the back and everything. He goes, "I'll buy you a new fire suit." I'm like, okay. So I won.
It was baby blue, as I remember.
Yeah. So I won with it. And so I held him up to his end of the deal, and he got me a new fire suit. I think from Fuller. Remember, we used to get him from Fuller.
Yeah, Filler,
San Fernando.
Yeah, on San Fernando Road.
So I think that was 87, maybe 88. And I drove it the next year, and I remember it had a Ford 9-inch rear end Chevelle. And I remember it was 4 of us that win the championship. I know it was Nikolai. I think it was Becker's. I think it was me. And I think maybe Blankenship, maybe you. I don't know, somebody. Any one of us could have won the championship. And I think I broke an axle because we just ran standard axles in that. And so that was the end of my chances. And I remember I said to Jack, we got to get a floater rear end for this thing because these broken axles, because the figure eight's pretty hard on the axles.
Yeah.
I said, we got to do that. So we did that the next year. Did you have a floater in yours or no? You just run the standard axles?
We had that big ass 31 spline Lincoln rear end in ours, you know, that, but we didn't even run. We didn't have, we just had straight axles. We didn't have drums, backing plates or nothing on that car, but those axles were massive. So your sister, is her husband Dave? Is it Pulaski?
Yeah. So they opened their own company, and they called it the Pulaski Group, which was his last name. And so they like racing and going out, and they were doing pretty well. So that's why we had Pulaski always on the side. And then they opened up another company called Matters of Fact. Same thing, pretty much, just a different name. And my sister still does that to this day. Now, her husband, Dave, he died, I believe, in 2016. He got thyroid cancer, which evidently has a 95% survival rate. He's the 5%. Yeah, for a while, we were doing both cars. I was doing the Chevelle of Jack Sanders and then our sportsman car. So, you know, we didn't get in a lot of trophy dashes with the sportsman car, but usually with Jack's car, we were in the trophy dashes. So theoretically, you'd run maybe a oval trophy dash, maybe a figure eight trophy dash, an oval heat race, a figure eight heat race, an oval main event, a figure eight main event, and then whatever sportsman races, at least a heat race and a main event. So that's a lot of racing in one night.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember you did that in 89, because I remember you parking in the backstretch and jumping back and forth. And 89 was the year that you were probably in the dash every week. I knew the dash every week was the same, you know, 4 or 6 guys, oval and 8. And you would we weren't swapping over setups yet, you know, even at the dash. So you just picked your poison, right? I'm either going to think I can win.
Right. One or the other, right? Where do I start?
Yeah. And I remember in 89, you started when we qualified figure eight. You were the first guy that I saw cut through the track by the fire extinguisher. Were you just doing that just to be a dick? Or were you...
kind of.
Yeah. But everybody started doing it after
that.
Right. Because it made sense, right? You could, I'm surprised Monty let you do it, but it was kind of like, hey, you know, what's he doing? And
and if you get a fast time, they're like, well, I'm gonna do that. That's how he's doing it, right? Monkey see, monkey do.
It made sense because your entry into the corner, you know, was good. And I was talking to Cromside on his podcast, and that year, I think the street stock division took the largest jump from like the Cran days, because I remember the first couple of races, 1900s would get you in the dash. By the end of the season, if you weren't in like, 1864, 65, you weren't in the dash. And so I think it was one of those years where a lot of guys, if we were all doing 1900s, we would have been like, okay, we're all right there. But then
Right.
every week someone was doing something a little, and then we were like, oh no, we can't let him do it. We can't let him do it.
But you know what I did learn over the years? Like I used to watch Minty, and Minty's been around their family racing longer than us. And they always had a pretty good sportsman car. And I think they had Grubbs motors even way back then.
Yeah.
And they used to go over before qualifying and they'd be over at the hose doing something with water. And I never really paid any attention. You know what they were doing?
No.
They were putting ice cold water in it. That's what they were doing, because the race engines, they like hot oil and cold water. That's where they make power. And they were doing that just for qualifying.
Interesting.
So they'd let out all the warm water and put in icy cold water from the hose and then go qualify. And I'm like, oh,
did you do
interesting,
it?
Right?
I saw guys dump ice on their intakes.
Yeah, I did that before too.
Yeah.
But I kind of learned that watching Minty and those guys, Monkey
Right.
see, monkey do.
Yeah, and that's how a lot of stuff happened. I also remember in '89, I think we broke the record, but you loaned us a transmission, which is probably unheard of because we were right, neck and neck in points, and only probably the same four guys won every main event that year. And then I remember at the end of the night they were going to tear us down, and you were like, you don't need to tear them down, their shit's legal. But Monty didn't like Cromside at all, so he still tore us down. And that was a fun year, and good racing. And then what year was it? I just remember one year in your super late, you stalled under the start finish line or something and just got destroyed. What?
That's my scar
From that wreck?
Yeah. So what happened is that was opening night.
Oh God.
I believe it was 93. And we had a brand new Jackson car and we didn't even test it. We just took it out there opening night. And what was happening is the offset on the right rear wheel wasn't right. And the mount for the screw jack was rolling, or the tire was rolling into that screw jack. So here's a screw jack and the tire was rolling into it and it wore a hole in it. We didn't even know because we weren't practicing, didn't get a chance to look. And I come out of the corner and the right front went flat up against the wall. And then Rod Johnson punted over the car. When I hit the wall, I was holding on to the steering wheel and my hand went in the spoke and it spun and just beat the hell out of my arm. And I'm like, I don't know, this doesn't feel very good. And I went to move my hand from the steering wheel and it stretched like a rubber band. And I'm in front of the grandstand. I'm like, all right, don't start crying here. You know what I mean? It hurts pretty bad. Everybody's looking at you. And they go, you all right? You're all right. And I remember even Natalie she didn't know what was wrong with me. They put all the, people in front of the mayhem to hide everything.
Yeah.
And they told her that I just had a broken arm. She's like, oh, big deal. But it was Labor Day weekend. That's not a good weekend to go to the ER at Henry Mayo because people are out water skiing and doing stupid stuff Saturday night. And they did an x-ray. They put me in the ambulance, take me to the x-ray guy. And he, it's just a kid. And I go, how's it look? He goes, well, I can't say. I go, what's all those pieces there? He goes, that's your bones. I'm like, oh. He goes, it's broken pretty bad. I'm like, oh, okay. So now what? He goes, you got to wait for the doctor. So I waited there 3 hours, I want to say, because when they took me to the hospital, it was still light out. And I want to say it was 11 o'clock when they decided they were going to fix it. But while I was there that night, a guy sitting next to me died, heart attack. I mean, I watched him give him the last rites and everything. And they're like, you all right? I'm like, yeah, I'm okay. I just got a broken arm here. I'd be all right.
Right.
So I woke up and I had 10 screws and a plate in my arm. And I said, so what's the deal here? And they said, well, we're going to leave it in there indefinitely until it heals. I'm like, okay. But the funny thing is, one of the screws, and they showed us an X-ray the next day. You know, they put it up on the chart, and your wrist has a bunch of little bones in it. It looks like rocks if you've ever seen an X-ray of your wrist. And one of the screws was right into that. And I said, what's the story with that? They go, it'll be all right. So then Monday I go in for physical therapy because they didn't put a cast on me because I have screws holding it together, and they try and move my wrist. It won't move. And so the physical therapist goes, we got to do an X-ray. Okay. So they do an X-ray. He goes, that screw's in the way. We got to take it out. So I went in like a day later, and they took out one screw, and then I could move my wrist. But I decided that I wanted to get a dish on my steering wheel so my arms didn't go in there, because
I remember you had, and I remember also I learned from you, don't put your thumb in there.
Right. Thumbs out, right?
Thumbs out. Yeah. I was in the stands that night, right by the press box when you got hit, and it was pretty violent. I remember it.
It was you don't think of that little track, you know, you're going that way. I mean, we're probably going 80, 90 maybe. But I've broken my fingers before there, you know, that in the figure eight. I never ran power steering forever.
Yeah, we didn't run it either. Cromsite said it was too heavy, and it was a belt that robbed horsepower. You know.
Yeah. I mean, looking back, we probably should have done it. But even at Irwindale, when that place opened in my street stock, I didn't have power steering, and it's a handful when you get it sideways and you have to steer really quick. And I finally decided I'm not the 5 horsepower, whatever. Who cares? You know, you got to be able to steer the thing.
Right.
Car from Mitch Allred. That would have been 94. That metric Chevelle.
92. I think.
Yeah, maybe it was.
Yeah.
No, I think it was 93.
Maybe
it was after
93.
I broke my arm, I think. But I remember, do you remember him taking that car out before?
Yeah. And then
because he worked at Hornadays. I mean, he's quite the fabricator. And I go, God dang, that's a pretty nice car. And then he'd wreck it just about it was really fast, but he'd wreck it just about every night.
Because he just came out of nowhere.
Yeah.
You know. But so did Schrader. What's Schrader's story? Like, he just came out of nowhere too. All of a sudden he just.
Well, Schrader worked at Saugus though.
Did he? And did he work for Goddard?
Well, no, I don't think he worked for Goddard, but he worked at Saugus as a little kid. If you ask him, he used to sell sodas and stuff.
Oh, seriously?
Yes. And I really didn't know that about him either. But, you know.
I'm going to get him on. Because all of a sudden he just showed up in that bitchin' Goddard car. Like, you know, we were pro stocks. Like, you never saw him in hobbies or anything. And all of a sudden, bam, this bitchin' car showed up. And, you know.
Yeah, so he worked for Ray Wilkins at the racetrack back in the day as a little kid. And I've heard stories about that. That would be some interesting stories too. You know that?
Yeah.
How they made money out there just selling, you know, Cokes and whatever. Yeah.
Right. Who was the toughest racer you ever raced with?
Out there?
Yeah.
Yeah, you were pretty tough. Cromsite was pretty tough. Who else was pretty tough? Dinger was pretty tough. You know that? Dale White, he was pretty tough. And the thing about Dale White, you know, he's also from Simi Valley. And the guy that used to do his engines had a machine shop literally 2 spots down from my dad's. And so indirectly, that guy helped us with machine shop stuff too. So we were kind of like wink, teammates, but we had a lot of battles, you know. And it was a little bit like I'd help him with his suspension, you know, at my dad's shop. And then, you know, we'd race each other and there'd be hurt feelings if somebody got spun out or he spun you out or whatever. I always like doing starts because everything I've ever raced has always been a stick shift, and I'm not afraid to row the gears. I mean, we used to have a 4-speed in that Thunderbird, and it was a top loader, and those are known as pretty fast shifting transmissions. And I always liked the starts better than anything. And I'd always try and get a big advantage on a start. You know, I'd be surprised most starts if I didn't have to rack them up and start again because I jumped the start all the time. I still do that, you know.
Which was hard to do at Saugus. Like, they really didn't have a rule where you could start. Like,
right
after if you were anywhere after the pit entrance, you know,
right,
backstretch.
Yeah, the pace car's out of the way. It's open season, right?
Let's go. Irwindale is different, right? And but how about Rodney?
Yeah, funny story about Rodney, because him and I battled. The first time I ever went in the pits at Saugus, I saw Rodney jump over someone's hood and start beating on him.
Rodney?
Pits, yes. I said, this is the best thing ever. I wasn't even, I think I just turned 18 because they wouldn't let you in the pits until you were 18. And I went in there and I saw fights and stuff. I'm like, wow, this is very entertaining. But Rodney and I, fast forward, we were at Willow, the little bull ring up there. What do they call that? Kern County.
Yeah.
Isn't that what they called it at the time? And we both had like sportsman type cars. And I think it was like a Thanksgiving race or something like that. And he was in front of me. And, you know, I was the designated hitter because I wasn't beating on Rodney too much, but everybody behind me was beating on me. So finally I said, well, I got to make a decision here. I'm either going to lose the tail of my car or I just maybe nudge Rodney out of the way. And I nudged him out of the way. And we didn't talk for years after that.
Seriously, he's hardcore, huh?
And you know, he's put roofs on my house before, and you know, I mean, it's one thing at the racetrack, maybe your competitors, but you know, off the side, I mean, hey, I need a roof. I'll come over and help you out. You know, he's come over like when the wind blows here in Simi Valley, and I lost some shingles, and he goes, oh, we'll just put them back on. I'm like, all right. But yeah, I think I want to say that happened because I know what broke the ice because my mom had died. She died in 2013. And we were at the racetrack and Rodney come over and he goes, I'm sorry about your mom. Because my mom always went to the races too. And I said, thanks, Rodney. And then after that, it was just like before. No big deal. Got over it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I remember.
I mean, I'm sure Garrett
always
over the years. I'm sure Garrett Cromside over the years, because him and I used to battle a lot.
Yeah, he holds a grudge too. You know, well, that one year, was the year Saugus closed in 95 when he had
I think
the
it was
Mustang?
because he had that orange Mustang and I had that metric Mitch Allred car.
You guys were just tearing your shit up every week.
For stupid. I mean, there's a picture. It used to be at Memory Lane at Tony Martinez's business. Cromside's car is 90 degrees to my car in the front. And I think I'm just buried in the throttle. And you can see the tires smoking. And I think we were leading. You know, he was leading or I was leading or whatever. And it's like, we probably could have both finished first, second if we would have just kept going. And then obviously I took him out on that one. So the next week, I knew it was coming. You know, you just tighten your seatbelts up and hang on, and thumbs out of the steering wheel. But
you guys got Kelly that week because Kelly was leading the championship and he got tied up with you and Cromside. And he actually I think broke in the heat race and he was leading the points and I had missed opening day and I had my Hamer car. And so we put Brian in my Hamer car and he only had to finish like top 10 or something to win the championship or stay there. And he went out and that was the night you tore that whole Mustang body off Cromside's car. Like the whole body came off almost. And it took the right front fender hood and door off of my car that Kelly was in. I remember Kelly came in the pits and he's like, oh, no, I'm sorry. I'm not going to finish the race. And I'm like, bullshit. You already tore it apart. Go, right. Just go, dude.
right.
And he went out and he finished good enough. He won the championship that year. But, yeah, you were fearless. I do have a picture of you into me pretty good in a trophy dash in the, with that Allred car, but you had a metal bumper. You didn't care. You know,
and you know, the whole time I had that car, I never replaced a body panel on it.
You probably didn't have to.
No, when I sold it to Lee Ladd, you know.
Oh.
So Saugus closed in 95, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a year after the earthquake, which is 94. And Saugus closed, and I went up to Willow, to the little bull ring a couple times, and it just wasn't the same because it wasn't really a lot of people there, and it just wasn't the same. And I'm like, I don't know if I want to do this. So I kind of panicked and I sold it $5,000 turnkey.
I don't remember him racing that car a lot.
No, I think
the body on it or something.
They did. And then they took that car to Irwindale in 99. And the late model class, that car won the championship.
Was that the Dr. Pepper car Cromside drove?
No, it was the Dusty
McDonald car.
Yeah. They put a different body on.
Cromside lost that by one race, 1 point.
Yeah, did he have a Camaro? No. Yeah, wasn't that a Camaro body?
Yeah, that was Lee Ladd put that team together. And I was going to race that car, but I was coaching my kids' basketball team, so I'm like, I can't race, you know. And Lee wanted to win the championship in every division, and I think that was the only one he lost. Was that
Oh,
one
really?
by like 1 point. And but you Kern turned out to be pretty good for a couple of years. Like you might have jumped ship too early, because once Saugus closed, Little Willow they were getting a pretty good street stock car count, you know, out there. No one really had a place to go. And you had a couple of West starts too, did you, at some point?
Yeah, I there's a guy here in Simi that had a satellite business, and he was okay as far as money, and he got of all people, it was a Rick Corelli car, West car, and a guy went out there and got it from Denver. I think he lived in the Denver area. Yeah, he was a High Plains drifter, right? That's what they called him.
Yeah.
And they brought this car home, and it was Illumina. I'm like, well, that car's cool. And so Sedgwick was kind of helping us a little bit too. And Sedgwick was doing the little tracks, and the guy said, well, you can drive the big tracks. I'm like, okay. So the best I ever finished in that car was Vegas, the big track. And I remember because Schrader was there, because he was with Golden West, I think, and Sean Woodside.
Yeah.
And, you know, I look at those big, long straightaways. I'm like, holy shit, what am I getting into, right?
Thumbs out, baby.
and I remember Schrader goes like this, tighten them up. I'm like, all right. And the track is a D, right? It looks like a big D, capital D. And I was so inexperienced, I didn't even realize you could hold it wide open down the front straightaway during the sweeping D. And then I was following somebody. I'm like, oh, they're holding it wide open. All right. So we're in the race, and it had Meropolis motors. So it, you know, it ran good, this car. And I remember I'm on the radio, and I said, it's running out of gas. They're like, keep going. You know, I get to the end of the straightaway and just, bleh. And then it'd pick up gas again and start going. And, you know, it was like 8 to go, or, you know, something. And we just probably didn't have the pickup in the right spot. And then it started missing. Keep going. I'm like, okay. And so I think there was a dust up with like 3 to go. And so they rack them up again, and I'm third. And I brought it home in third, and they roll us over to tech, and the thing's wheezing, and, you know, it's not running very good. And I told everybody, I said, I'm sure it's got a broken rocker arm or something. And they made us P&G it, you know, take it apart. And it had 2 broken Jessel rocker arms. And we still finished third. That's the best I ever did. But that race paid $7,900. And that was in 97, I think. Yeah, 1997. So I got to do that. I got to race the first race ever at Fontana. So that's really fast. That's 2 miles.
Yeah, that.
And that's, remember Kenny Smith, right? Won the lottery.
Yeah.
Well, that's right. When he won the lottery, remember he had number 43 Quick Pick Racing. And I remember he broke a brake rotor in front of me there, and I ran over it. And remember Benny Parsons? He used to come in the pits for those races, even the Saturday West race like us. And he saw us beating on these stainless steel headers. And he goes, I got to get out of this high class operation. But he was a really nice guy. You know, that
Yeah.
he'd come talk to everybody. Normal, yeah. Just a normal guy.
He'd come talk to us at Tucson during winter heat.
Right. Yeah. I did that a couple times. You were in IMCA car, right?
Yeah. I took my modified down there, and he was just, you know,
normal.
Come chat with everybody. He didn't care.
Right.
What'd you run down there? You're super late, or?
Yeah. We were running a Windsor Ford there. And I remember I had one of those Doug Nash 2-speed transmissions, and it was a long race, and it pitched the seal out of the back because it got so hot. Yeah, that was the end of that. We
had one in my that 38 super late that I had with Johnson, and the thing leaked every week. You know, it was a good concept. Easy to change the gears, but I mean, you better have like 3 or 4 Kotex in your toolbox ready to wrap around.
Yeah, they were like a Valdez the way they leaked. They just leaked all the time, right?
Yeah, yeah. Where else did you run a West car? So Fontana, you're hauling mail down the straightaway there. Woodside,
yeah, Fontana, Tucson. So good, the first ever one was Tucson, and it rained all day when we got there. And they said, well, we're going to just qualify. I'm like, okay, but no practice. They said no. So West cars, even back then, the sway bar sat below the control arms, and we didn't know any better. And you remember how you used to run a chain on one side and a solid? Well, we had it backwards. So the only time the sway bar worked is when you turned right. It's like, oops.
Awesome.
You'd think a front end guy would have known that. We're like,
Yeah.
oh, it's right. And I qualified fourth, I remember, just completely sideways, but it had a Meropolis motor, so it thundered. And I'm like, well, how'd we do? They said, well, you're fourth. And I want to say 10 laps into that race, I was a lap down because I just burned up the right rear, because it was so loose.
Yeah.
But I think I finished eighth there, just kind of staying out of trouble. So I ran there. I ran Vegas, and I ran Fontana. I think that's about it. I think 4 or 5 races all I raced in that car.
When did you hook up with Marop? Because I remember I bought that Marop motor from you, and I thought, holy shit, if I would have had one of these my whole career, I would have killed everybody.
So he's from Simi Valley. Well, he's from Glendale, but he lives in Simi Valley, and he's lived here a long time. And the guy that had the West car was having Meropolis do the motors. So I just kind of got to know him because he ran the valves. They had to adjust the valves. It seems like every other, practice session, they had the valve covers off and they're running the valves. I mean, I think we were turning them like 9,600 or something crazy on some of the little tracks. I'm like, these are just small block Chevys. They're not LS motors or anything. And I just got to kind of know him. And then, he's local. And then I had him do because we tried to get him to build a Ford for us, but he didn't want to do Fords because he was Chevrolet. So finally I got a Chevrolet engine from one of my late models and just kind of knew him ever since. Now he has a T-bucket. I don't know if everybody knows his T-bucket, but it's got an LS with 3 500 Hollies like we used to have to run. And still some places you have to run a 500 Holly. Well, one of them he's got is one of mine on his T-bucket. They're VDLs, are all high dollar ones, but I just kind of, he's a really helpful guy. And, as long as you, don't expect too much, he'll do anything for you. Right. Like I went over there with broken motors. He goes, oh, we'll fix it. I'm like, all right. That was probably 97, 98.
I got that one from you for my street stock, the open division at Irwindale, and I raced it on the half mile one week, and that thing thundered. And it wasn't even I put it in third gear because I had the short track gear on it, but I was on the half mile, and I remember just coming through the main event like it was nothing.
Right?
The torque was just amazing. Then I got black flagged with 1 lap to go.
Oh, because you were stinking up the show?
Well, I mean, Lester had told me, I said, hey, look, this is a legit street stock, really. It just has a fiberglass body on it. And we had met with him and Schrader and DeFazio, and they said, all right, because I said, you guys are nuts to not let some of these other cars mix in. You need the car count. And it's a stock Chevelle chassis with a fiberglass body. They were like, okay, well, give us an honest look. But Lester said, don't win. I said, okay, I won't. I doubt I can, but I won't. And because I had the wrong gear in it. And I remember taking off, I started in the back, and then I was like picking people off. And then with like 5 to go, Cromsight got Sinesse, and I was in third. And I'm like, I want to just go F with Cromsight. Maybe they'll let me beat Cromsight. So I passed Sinesse, and then I went up and got next to Cromsight. And then I was going to back off. They black flagged me, and I pulled in the infield. Then they pissed me off because they posted in the paper that I was DQ'd. And I was like, that pisses me off, right? Like, you could have just left it alone that I pulled in the pits. And speaking of DQ'd, I remember you got DQ'd at Irwindale one week.
I did.
What would you have? Were you illegal?
I
really honestly don't know. I just remember the week after you guys wore DQ shirts. I thought that was pretty cool.
And you know what it was? So the car had subframe connectors, and they were supposed to be 2x2. And this car had 2x3. So I was disqualified for frame rail connectors that were too big.
Some of
So
the
what I
stuff
do,
Lester nail you for just
so
pissed me
I
off.
so I called up Kenny Bose. I said, dude, they DQ'd me for these frame rails. He goes, really? I said, all right. So I took a couple of days of work, went over to his little shop in Ventura, and literally we took a plasma cutter and cut 1 inch off those rails, and then he welded on a cap. And then I went out and won again. I mean, to me, that's kind of like sweet revenge when they
Right.
DQ you and then you go out and win again. It's like, okay, maybe it wasn't the call that made you win, you know? Have you ever been DQ'd
Yeah. Yeah.
before?
I got nailed once at Saugus. It was, so we had a pro built engine in 89, and I took Grubbs a set of heads, and he did a set of heads for me, and we came out and we did a 1859, I think, and everybody else was in the 70s, and I was like, this freaking, this thing is wicked. So obviously they're gonna tear you apart. So they asked to see a head, and I remember Cromsite, when he took them off, he said, you're screwed, dude. And I'm like, why? And I don't know anything about engine. He goes, these are ported and polished. These are full on. I go, I gave him the freaking rules, He goes, dude, these are ported and polished. He goes, we shouldn't even take them in there because, you're not, Monty would keep it, right? And so we took one head in, and then he said, can I see the other head? And I said, no. I said, tell me what the deal is with this head. Cause I had learned, right? You're not going to get it. Now he's going to
Right.
keep
Whatever you
my
give
heads.
them, it's theirs, right?
So he said, yeah, this head's ported and polished. It's illegal. You're DQ'd. So I called Grubbs on Monday morning, and he goes, I know what you're going to say. And I said, well, what? And he goes, well, Pete gave you the wrong heads. He goes, he gave one of my drag race guys your heads. And he goes, that guy called me Sunday and was pissed off because he was like slow. And he goes, so I knew there was a call coming, from you. He goes, I got to get that head back. What happened to it? And I go, they kept it. He goes, I got to get it back. I go, they don't ever give it back. He goes, I'm calling them. So he called, couldn't really get through to anything. So I don't drink at all. So that next week I took an ice chest into the blockhouse and put it in there. And then I went in and I grabbed the head and put it in the ice chest.
Well, you did?
The ice
In the
chest
ice chest?
and wheeled it out.
Smuggled it?
Jailbreak. And I wheeled it out and took it back. But that was the only time. I'm not going to say it was the only time I was illegal, but that was the only time I ever got popped. But then when we came back out the next week, we were faster still,
right?
Even with the, but I remember one time at Irwindale, they wanted to see my distributor before. I don't remember if it's in my modified or my pro stock, but anyway, they wanted to see distributors before the race, and I was by myself, and I said, I'll show it to you, but I'm going home. And I remember you came up, had my car in the trailer and I was getting ready to go home. And you're like, why are you going home? And I said, because they took the distributor and I don't know how to put it back in. And you're like, what? And I'm like, I don't know how to put it back in and you're like, dude, I'll do it for you. And you plugged it back in and fired it up. So I raced that night. I was going to go home. I didn't know. Cromside did all that. And my buddy Gary, he had Pro Automotive and see me forever.
Oh yeah. Right.
Yeah.
That's we built Tony's car. Remember that night we built Tony's car?
Dude, 24-hour. And that was I need to get Tony on too. He probably has some, I'd like to see his picture collection, but yeah, we built that. I think they brought it to us at it was in the evening.
Yeah, I think we started probably 3 or 4 in the afternoon at that friend of yours shop. And we had whatever we needed at the shop we could use, wire cutters, wire splices, whatever. He said, look, you can use it, whatever in the shop. But our goal was to get it ready. This was Friday night, wasn't it?
Yeah, he was racing the next day.
And Schrader just put a cage in it at Race Car Factory. So it was a really nice cage. And I think it was painted pretty, pick apart and whatever.
Yep. No
seat. And our task was to make it a race car overnight.
Yeah.
And I remember we were there till 3 or 4 in the morning.
Yeah. But we had a lift and
right.
Could make noise, but we didn't have, we might have had some torches there, but I don't know if we needed them, but there was no motor, no trans. The rear end wasn't welded up or something.
No, and I vaguely remember at 1 in the morning, everybody's losing steam. It's nah, it's not going to happen. It's come on, let's go. We were all pretty young then, so it wasn't as hard to keep going all night.
Yeah.
But I remember Tony was pretty stoked, and it ran halfway good for something we threw together in a night, right?
Well, and it lasted a long. I mean, that car ran that division for, you know, a number of years. But yeah, I forgot about that. That was pretty. That was
Right.
But you're right. When you're young, you know, now there's crap I go out of my garage. And I'm like, yeah, I'm not going to do this. You know, I'm just not going to go because I don't have the energy to do it.
Right.
I remember it. I think I saw a picture, but I was there that night. But you stacked that 3 car, that black and blue Camaro, up pretty high under the scoreboard one night
At Irwindale.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what happened is somebody crashed, and I was running on the outside, and I came to a complete stop. And Kenny Brown, number 17, remember Uptown Kenny
Green
Brown?
and white car, yeah.
He came in pretty hot, and I think locked him up, and he backed into me backwards, and his car went under mine, and I thought I was vertical.
Yeah.
I thought it was going to roll over, and it came back down, and somebody's got a photo of it. And then I think Lee came in and wrecked into that, and there's a big stack up. I have a picture in my garage of it. And I remember I was living at my other house, and we fixed that car in the driveway. And I think even you came over because I was leading the points. It's like, I got to put this thing back together. And I think you come over and some other people. I think you had a drive shaft, or I don't remember something, or maybe a leaf spring or something. But we raced it the next week.
When I came to your dad's memorial, I learned a lot about him that I didn't know either. And what a great dude he was. He was always friendly if you walk up and talk to him. But I think the best story that I heard at his memorial was that he was a pilot. And obviously, I found out he was a veteran, and that holds a special place in my heart, as it does with yours. But that he used to put you guys in that, whatever it was, that little Cessna, you and your sister,
172.
and you guys would go places.
Yeah, and we'd fly. I remember we flew to Tennessee, and we used to go out of Van Nuys and Van Nuys Airport. And I remember when we came back from a cross-country trip on a 172, and 172 only go like 100 miles an hour, 120. So you're not going that fast. It's not like you make it in one day.
Right.
And you really don't want to fly at night. You're flying over mountains and stuff. So it's kind of dangerous. And I remember we landed at Van Nuys, and my mom got out and she kissed the ground. She literally kissed the ground.
Yeah. She a nervous flyer, huh?
Yeah, and then I was pretty little, and I'd get ear infections, and those planes weren't pressurized. So if you had an ear infection, and my sister said I was always crying, it's like, well, yeah, I had no amoxicillin back then, right? I mean,
right. You guys could have flown to El Cajon and just landed right there. Did you ever race any other tracks like Whiteman or?
No, I raced El Cajon. I broke the guy's foot at El Cajon.
And you're super late?
Yes. Guy had his foot up on the wall, and I think I tagged the wall a little bit, and his foot was there. I'm like, well, that probably wasn't a good move. Why is that my fault?
Right. And we were talking. I thought about this when the modifieds rolled out on the track at the modifieds are kind of a dying breed too. And if they just would even say that they were Acura Integras, like just picture the whole modified. Like when I had my Hamer Toyota modified at Irwindale, at Saugus, we called it a Toyota Supra. And Toyota wasn't even in the racing game yet, but the way I sold it to Hamer was, this is a Toyota Supra, and they were all jazzed about it, right? Well, imagine like in the modified divisions, probably the only division, I guess you have Camrys, but kids don't care about a Camry, but you know more about the rice burner stuff than I do. But imagine if the modifieds, if they called them like, a GTR or, the kids could get behind that, right? But the kids nowadays, they don't know what a Camaro is or a Monte Carlo or they don't care, right? So if they just would make some kind of who cares, call a Camaro body, something, Nissan GTR or whatever, the kids would at least kind of get excited and get around that, And,
so yeah, I have this little Acura in my garage. That's
that little green
my
thing,
wife and kids and sister, and I took it out of Irwindale last year and practiced it, and it's quicker than you think. You know that?
On where you do, is it, they call it an enduro? You do a little road course
Yeah, but I
with
was
it?
just on the little oval,
The
like
third
I was
mile?
racing my
I love
Camaro.
that
Yeah.
track.
And I mean, obviously it doesn't run down the straightaway like my Camaro, but it's got 500 pounds of lead in it to be at the weight roll. So all that lead is right where you want it, down on the ground. You know, it's 50-50 front to rear, 50-50 side to side.
But
So
why do they need
imagine,
a weight roll in that division?
well, I said that to the officials. I said, this got a small block Chevy mounted in it, is basically what it has in weight. Is that
Yeah.
the smartest thing to do?
It's weighs more than it does from the factory. I mean, the weight rule, I get it in some divisions, it had to come, but then a guy has to have scales, and then he has to be able to weigh it, and everything is so difficult. It's difficult to race now, even if you have the resources. It's difficult, you know. So, well, hey, I appreciate you coming on. Merry Christmas to you and the girls, and Natalie. Maybe we should probably do a show with just Natalie. She probably has some great stories, right?
I got better
You know?
stories than me, right?
Yeah, we didn't hit them all, but you know, appreciate you coming on, and you know, always been a good friend, and we've always traded stuff back and forth, and you know, appreciated your sportsmanship, and good times, right?
Hey, well, thanks for having me, huh?
Yep, I'll be in touch.
All right, see ya.
Thanks.